Let me ask you something, and don't answer with pride, answer with honesty. Are you really heartbroken over them, or are you devastated because the version you created in your mind just collapsed? Be real with yourself. That version, the one who never lied, who loved you without hesitation, who stood by your side no matter what, that version never existed. It was a story, a comforting illusion. And now that it's gone, you're not grieving a person, you're grieving a fantasy. That's the real sting. That's why you're restless at 2 a.m., scrolling, spiraling, trying to make sense of something that was never real to begin with. Here's the hard truth nobody tells you because it's easier to blame them than to admit this to yourself. You weren't in love with them. You were in love with the idea of them, the role they played in your life, the image they reflected back to you, the future you mentally photoshopped together. And when that illusion broke, it wasn't just a breakup. It was an identity crisis. Who are you without this fantasy? Where do you go when your emotional GPS was programmed to someone who never truly showed up? But what if I told you this moment, the heartbreak, the silence, the space, wasn't a punishment, but a portal? A brutally honest opportunity to stop bleeding over a fiction and start building from truth. Because the pain you're feeling? That's not weakness. That's awakening. It's your mind pulling off the mask you refused to admit they were wearing. And I know, right now you want to fix it. You want to text. You want closure. You want to explain. But none of that brings the illusion back. None of that gives you peace. Because peace doesn't come from chasing. It comes from clarity. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming whole. You're not going to numb your way through this. You're going to understand it, own it, and grow from it. We're going to dismantle the illusion, not with anger, but with precision. We're going to take your power back, not by posting, not by pretending, but by practicing what Stoicism has taught the strongest souls for centuries. Detachment is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of it. So if you've ever loved someone who turned out to be a stranger, if you've ever felt like the emotional wreckage wasn't from their absence but from your own expectations collapsing, you're in the right place. Because what comes next is more than healing, it's transformation. Stay with me until the end, because the final section? That's the one that's going to change the way you look at love forever. Ready? Let's begin. 1. The illusion was yours, not theirs. You ever stop and wonder why the heartbreak cuts so deep, why your chest still hurts even after weeks, months, or sometimes years? It's not because you lost them. It's because you lost the version of them you created, a version that never truly existed. You didn't fall for reality. You fell for a masterpiece you painted in your mind. That image was flawless. It reflected everything you needed: loyalty, understanding, consistency. So why does this feel like betrayal? Because you gave your heart to an illusion. Think about it. How many times did you replay that moment when they said, "I love you"? You pressed pause and played it on repeat because your mind craved validation. But validation from who? From the real person, or from the projection in your imagination? You're not alone if you made excuses for them. Maybe they're busy, maybe they didn't mean it that way, maybe tomorrow will be different. Excuses are love's little lies that keep you chained to something that never existed. That mental image became your anchor, and when the anchor sank, so did your world. The illusion offered comfort. It promised safety. It promised depth. You believed it stalked your dreams because you needed it to. But here's the raw truth: you were the architect. You chose to build with fantasy. You chose to tuck away doubt. You chose to overwrite warnings. And now that the structure collapsed, it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like you betrayed yourself. So ask yourself, what was the version you loved really offering you? Was it loyalty, or was it reassurance? Was it depth of connection, or was it a mirror reflecting your own desires? Was it love, or was it the idea of being deeply loved? That version you worshipped? That version was a placeholder. It held space for your security, your validation, your identity. It was the person you thought would heal your insecurities, the person who would fill the void you never fully acknowledged. It wasn't them you loved. It was what they represented, an escape from loneliness and uncertainty. Now reflect, how much of what you felt was real? The late-night conversations, the heartfelt messages, were they genuine expressions, or were they dramaturgy tailored to your longing? When they smiled, did your heart soar because they truly saw you, or because your mind told you they did? That's the problem with illusions. They feel so vivid that distinguishing them from reality becomes impossible. And here's the kicker, part of you knew it. Deep down, beneath the layers of hope and emotional investment, there was an inkling that this was too good to be true. But you pushed it aside, buried it in optimism, shushed the inner voice that said, "This isn't sustainable." Because optimism felt better than facing the truth. Doubt felt like admitting defeat. So you silenced it, and in doing so, you handed that illusion absolute power over your emotions. Why is this important? Because recognizing the difference between reality and fantasy is the first step toward reclaiming your power. When your emotions are tethered to a mental projection, you stop living in the moment. You stop responding to what is, and you start chasing what might be. And chasing is exhausting. Chasing keeps you suspended in an emotional limbo, either here nor gone, either healed nor broken. You remain stuck between your heart and your mind. Let's be clear. Illusions aren't always malicious. Sometimes they're survival mechanisms. They cushion the blow of loneliness. They give you purpose. They give you hope. They offer a storyline that says, "This time will be different." But when that storyline cracks, it reveals more about you than about them. It reveals where your neediness lurks. Where your self-worth hinges on external validation. Where your boundaries were too porous. Where you allowed yourself to fall into emotional debt, expecting them to pay with consistency and loyalty. When they didn't, the debt came due, and the interest was heartbreak. Now ask yourself, who's responsible for this illusion? Them? Not really. They played the role you cast. Their consistency, their affection, all of it was relative to how you treated the relationship. If you treated them like the flawless partner, you convinced them to perform it. And people can maintain a role, until they can't. At which point, the illusion cracks. And what comes through is real, flaws, limitations, priorities, truth. So, can we blame them? Or should we hold ourselves accountable? Because if this illusion was something you created, then the reconstruction starts here. You reclaim your emotional sovereignty when you stop chasing projections and face what is. Not what you wish it to be. Not what you fantasized. But what you observed. What you experienced firsthand. That's real. That's truthful. And that's what you can build on. Here's some tough love. Illusions feed dependency. They feed a narrative that life will only feel complete if they say yes. But Stoicism teaches us differently. Stoicism says, control what you can control. You can't control how they act. You can't control what they meant. But you can control what you allow yourself to believe. You can control the stories you internalize. You can control whether you choose clarity or continue knuckling down in fantasy. That's the root of Stoic relationships, recognizing that every emotional collapse is your own responsibility. That doesn't mean blaming yourself. It means owning your role. But this ownership is the lantern in the darkness. Because once you own it, you stop being the victim of the illusion. You stop being the producer of someone else's role. You start living by principles, clarity, resilience, self-honesty. You learn to check your stories. You learn to question your assumptions. You learn to journal your feelings and test them against observable facts. Did they actually say this? Did they actually follow through? Were their actions consistent with their promises? This isn't paranoia, it's clarity. It's an armor against future illusions. It's how you ensure you're in a relationship with who they are, not the placeholder in your mind. Ask yourself, how many beliefs did you suspend for this illusion to survive? How many red flags did you excuse? How many apologies sounded rehearsed? How many times did their actions not match their words, but you let the story win? Every disconnect between word and deed was a crack in the facade. You knew somewhere, and you hoped. Hope without evidence is waiting without purpose. And that's where pain lives. Now, as you process this, don't beat yourself up. Be curious. Curiosity is the antidote to emotional self-flagellation. Ask yourself genuine questions. What did I want from this relationship? What did I avoid addressing? My own wounds, my own codependency. What illusions have I carried before? Where else am I repeating this pattern? Stoicism teaches us not to be harsh, but to be clear, as though we're a scientist examining our own emotions. What is the data? What's the interpretation? What can be learned? This is not therapy, it's self-leadership. And here's the shift: the illusion doesn't only hurt. It's also a teacher. A brutal teacher, yes, but effective. It taught you can create stories. It taught you what you yearned for. It taught you what boundaries you neglected. It taught you where your self-talk bends toward fantasy. And now, gratitude? Maybe not yet. But there's power in acknowledging the lesson. Once the lesson is integrated, every future relationship is informed. You're not starting from scratch, you're starting from truth. Clarity doesn't feel safe initially. It feels cold. It feels lonely. The silence after the illusion is still. But stillness is a ground floor. That empty space? That's your sandbox. That's where you build again. Not with illusions, but with intention. A relationship built on mutual truth, shared reality, emotional accountability. Not on projection or fantasy. That's what Stoic relationships demand: authenticity, integrity, reciprocity. That doesn't mean perfection, it means presence. Do you see the difference? Presence sees the cracks early. Presence hears the mismatches between word and deed. Presence recognizes the performance. Presence asks, are we being real right now, or am I just performing for my own comfort? Being present is the healing that comes after the collapse. It's what makes you a player in life, not an observer of someone else's performance. It's what allows you to step into relationships that cultivate value, not worship an illusion that drains it. So ask yourself, in what situations did the illusion make you blind? How many times did you sacrifice your own clarity to keep the story alive? What would happen if you refused to play the role in your own mind? What would it look like to insist your relationships align with your perceptions, not your projections? That's where empowerment begins. That's where boundaries dominate emotion. That's the beginning of reparenting your own emotional system. Here's the final anchor. Illusions can't hurt you if you never confuse them for truth. So the next time you feel that ache, or when someone shows you their version of themselves, stop. Pause. Check. Not with accusations, but with inquiries. That feels good, but is it consistent? That sounds sincere, but is it real? That promise is comforting, but did I hear it before? Approach it like a Stoic scholar investigating a claim, to build with discernment, not with hope. Because you know what? Hope isn't the problem. False hope is. True hope is built on the foundation of real, consistent actions. And maybe the illusion taught you that hope can feel like peace until it collapses. But now, hope can feel like a promise you make to yourself. I will see clearly. I will hold space for reality. I will love honestly. I will stay aware. I will remain whole. That's empowerment. That's emotional freedom. That's why the illusion matters, and why letting it go matters more. Because you didn't lose a real person. You lost your mental placeholder. And in losing it, you've cleared the way for something real, something capable of lasting, something worth building. Not in fantasy, but in truth. 2. Reality versus fantasy, the emotional collapse. Have you ever been so sure that everything would always be perfect, only to have that certainty evaporate overnight? When the notes stopped aligning with the melody you created in your heart, it wasn't betrayal, it was revelation. And that collapse? It felt like a bomb going off inside your chest. Because what died wasn't just a relationship, it was the fantasy you built on hope and assumption. Picture this: you're convinced your connection is deep. You feel seen. You're confident they hear you. And every kind word, every gesture, reinforces a story in your head. They get you, they're committed, they're the one. But gradually, small inconsistencies emerge. A missed call, a delayed text, a comment that feels distant. You shrug it off. It's just a busy day, you tell yourself. But the cracks keep appearing. And each one chips away at your confidence. Then comes the moment when the illusion disintegrates. Maybe they ghost you. Maybe their energy changes. Maybe a truth surfaces that shifts your perception. And suddenly the script flips. The fantasy that felt so vivid becomes a hallucination. And that rush of grief you feel? That's not sorrow over loss. It's the release of believing in something that wasn't real. Ask yourself, was it real when you believed they shared your values? Was it real when you thought they'd always choose you? When their actions stopped matching your expectations, did you ignore it? Or did you finally see what was always there? The collapse didn't create new truths, it unveiled old ones buried beneath your own narrative. Why is this collapse so brutal? Because it strikes at your identity. When your vision stops aligning with reality, you're left in an emotional vacuum. You thought your relationship anchored you, but it was your fantasy that held you down. And suddenly, you feel weightless. Lost. Contemplating, who am I now, if that story vanishes? But listen, collapse is also clarifying. It's not the end. It's a reset. The Stoic Relationships framework teaches that truth is the foundation of resilience. When illusions fall, they clear the debris so you can build on real ground. That means examining the details with ruthless honesty. Those late replies, were they an exception or a pattern? Those half-hearted declarations, were they scripted or sincere? Those convenient apologies, were they genuine or rehearsed? Here's where your growth begins, in the data. Grief without insight is just suffering. But grief with analysis is your greatest upgrade. Start recording the evidence: habitual inconsistency, emotional unavailability, misalignment with values. Stop comparing what could have happened with what actually happened. That comparison only prolongs the collapse. Stoicism trains you to separate desire from data. So ask, what evidence supports the image you had? What evidence contradicts it? Be rigorous. As the fantasy collapses, your emotional system screams for answers. It wants justification. It wants redemption. It wants to rewrite the ending so that the illusion survives. But that's like trying to resurrect a dam after it's burst. If foundations are cracked, repair attempts keep failing. Instead, turn inward. Breathe. Observe. Let the collapse happen fully. Because resisting it only extends the agony. When the illusion crumbles, you realize you weren't invested in who they are, you were attached to who you needed them to be. That attachment wasn't mutual. It never was. Because they never signed up to meet your internal storyline. They showed up as they were, and you responded as you wanted them to be. That dissonance led to collapse. Stoic relationships thrive on mutual perception, seeing you as you are, not as you wish. And when that stops happening, the relationship falters. Now, as you walk through the emotional wreckage, hold space for acceptance. Pain demands acceptance before transformation. Feel it. Name it. But don't let it define you. This collapse also rewires your emotional circuitry. You begin to recognize that hope is not always a virtue, it's sometimes denial. You learn that consistency is the only truth worth trusting. You learn that mismatches in actions cannot be ignored without cost. You learn that it's not greed or bitterness to expect words to match deeds, it's sanity. Ask yourself, what emotional debts did you ignore because you were clinging to hope? What repeated behavior did you rationalize? What patterns kept you playing a role in someone else's life while neglecting your own authenticity? Use this collapse as a laboratory to inspect your own red flags, your own triggers. Stoicism emphasizes self-awareness before direction. Now is that direction. The emotional collapse isn't regret, it's recalibration. It's telling you where your boundaries were too thin, where your emotional logic betrayed you, where your self-worth based itself on someone else's performance. That's painful, but it's also precision. A blueprint for the next phase. When you're ready, Begin the deconstruction ritual, journal the mismatch. Note the moments when you saw hints of inconsistency. Write down the exact behaviors that clashed with your expectations. Compare the pattern of fantasy you held to the pattern of reality they showed. Shine a spotlight on illusions you misnamed as trust, hope, or trustworthiness. It may burn. It may feel unforgiving. But that pain is catalytic. It's not punishment, it's power charging. It's proof you can survive being unmasked. That you can withstand loss of image and emerge anchored in truth. That's what Stoicism teaches. Emotional mastery comes from clarity, not comfort. When patterns are identified, boundaries become possible. And boundaries are not walls, they're guardrails. They don't shut you out, they guide your engagement. You rebuild not by pretending the collapse didn't happen. You rebuild by insisting on alignment. Word to action, promise to proof, expression to consistency. Soon you'll look back on this collapse with respect. Not nostalgia. Not bitterness. But as a moment when you chose truth over illusion. When a Stoic relationship, rooted in reality, became possible. When you said, "I refuse to lower my standards or overlook my needs just to preserve a story." That's where dignity lives. Look at your heart, freshly exposed. That's the diamond that survived the collapse. It's not broken, it's purified. And purified diamonds catch light in ways polished ones can't. You may have lost a fantasy, but who you are? That abundance remains. Your self-worth remains. And now your capacity to love is sharper, more discerning, more grounded. This emotional collapse chapter doesn't end with you devastated. It ends with you awake. Awaken to your own emotional patterns. Awake to the cost of illusions. Awake to the freedom of building from truth. When this collapse closes, a stronger you walks through. That's Stoic relationships in action, anchored, attentive, unafraid of reality. Now, as this part closes, I want you to settle into the new ground. Look around, this is where you start again. Not with what you hoped they were, but with what you saw. And if you're watching this video, pause here. Ask in the comments, what pattern did you ignore? What mismatch hurt? Hit like and comment number 1 if this resonates. And if you want to reclaim your power by building resilient, truth-based connection, subscribe and stay with me. We continue this journey in the next part. 3. You handed them power they never earned. Have you ever paused to wonder how someone who barely showed up managed to influence your life so profoundly? Looking back, the heartbreak wasn't just about losing them. It was about realizing how much power you handed to someone who didn't earn it, and then wondering why the foundation gave way so suddenly. That house wasn't built on truth, it was built on your emotional investment, and when the groundwork shifted, everything collapsed. You didn't just lose a person, you lost authority over your own emotional world. Think of it like this: every time you overlooked inconsistency or excused behavior you didn't deserve, you were making a deposit into their emotional bank. Trust, loyalty, validation. But did they ever make a deposit into yours? If you rewind the story, how many times did you hope, wait, and rationalize, hanging on to a promise rather than to patterns? You believed in their capacity to love you, but did they actually prove it beyond words? Let me make this concrete. How many times did you send a message first? How often did you initiate conversation, emotional vulnerability, or meetups? Each time you pushed forward without reciprocation, you passed them a key to your internal world. That key gave them access to your thoughts, your self-worth, your priority list. Did they enter with gratitude or entitlement? Let's be honest, power as a concept isn't negative. It only becomes so when control is given without discernment. You can offer power to someone who deserves it, or you can hand it over to someone who doesn't. And you did the latter, believing loyalty would change inconsistency, believing your reliability would spark theirs, believing your devotion would be matched. That's hopeful, yes, but also dangerous when hope isn't anchored in proof. So when they left, or when their actions faltered, what happened to your sense of control? It evaporated. You felt powerless. They became the center of your emotional universe. even when they weren't the type of person you thought them to be. That dichotomy leads to buying emotional options you don't deserve, chasing, explaining, justifying, to salvage the status you once granted them. And it sinks you deeper every time. But here's the revelation: reclaiming your life starts with reclaiming your power. It means recognizing that authority over your emotional well-being has always belonged to you, not to them. They weren't the gatekeeper. You were. And the goodwill you gave was yours to distribute, to anyone deserving. But when they failed that implicit contract, you didn't just lose them, you lost trust in yourself. How do you rebuild? You reverse the flow. You identify the moments you sacrificed your standards, when you tolerated broken promises, inconsistency, half-truths, or disrespect. Those were moments you lowered your guard. You let them cross lines that should have remained unmoved. At the roots of Stoic relationships lies the discipline to hold your values as non-negotiable. Not rigid, but unwavering. Ask yourself, when did you stop seeing yourself as worthy of equal energy? When did you let someone else's availability, or lack thereof, define your self-esteem? Emotional equity isn't mutuality alone, it's measuring whether someone belongs in your narrative. Stoic relationships emphasize the balance. You give when they match, and withhold when they don't. That's not coldness. It's clarity. Now imagine rewiring your life so that your emotional flow is controlled by your principles, not by a person's presence or absence. If someone doesn't honor your value, you don't chase. If someone does honor it, you reciprocate wholeheartedly. That's not transactional, it's respectful. You aren't asking for perfection, you're demanding alignment. This empowers you because power isn't obtained through domination, it's reclaimed through boundaries. Boundaries that say, I choose what I accept. Boundaries that say, I won't internalize inconsistency. Boundaries that say, my peace is a priority. And every time you reinforce them, you reinforce yourself. Slowly, the chain that gave someone else authority over you dissolves. I know it feels risky, feels lonely, feels radical. But I promise this, the moment you stop granting power to someone unworthy, you feel your center return. You stop agonizing over drafts and unanswered texts. You stop preloading scenarios. You stop spinning your world around someone who never invested in yours. Instead, you anchor to your values, to your routines, to your self-respect. Why does this feel transformative? Because now you're living for your own metrics. Your worth becomes self-administered, not externally supplied. And that's an emotional revolution. In that space, Stoicism teaches that desire must be governed by evaluation. Before investing, ask, is this person showing up in real, measurable ways? Or am I fueling a story? Let actions speak first. Then respond accordingly. That's the discipline of mature attachment. As you do this, watch how your energy regenerates. Your friends notice. You smile more. You feel conviction in your convictions. Because you're no longer divided, investing in ghosts and abandoning yourself. You're centered, not scattered. You're courageous, not clinging. The internal argument dissolves. Should I text? Should I wait? Because you chose consistency as your standard. That standard doesn't waver, even when others do. Now, owning your power doesn't mean shutting people out. It means engaging them from authority, not desperation. If they deserve your investment, give it. If they don't, thank them for the clarity and redirect your focus. It's not rejection, it's redirection. It's sticky though. It feels like withdrawal because your ego resists losing emotional authority. But Stoicism teaches you to prefer emotional sovereignty over emotional attachment. There will be days when your instinct to give power back returns. You'll justify. You'll romanticize. That's human. But each time it happens, ask, is this choice giving them access to what they showed me they never value? That pause is your power checkpoint. And every time you activate it, you reclaim a piece of yourself from the illusion. We're often taught that love requires sacrifice, until we sacrifice too much and erase ourselves. But Stoic relationships ask, what sacrifices become self-destruction? Where do healthy limits protect your integrity? Where does your capacity to love include self-protection? When you realize your choices created the problem, you can also create the solution. Rebuilding from here means rewriting the contract with yourself. I will not grant emotional access without reciprocity. I will not stay where I'm not valued. I will not compromise my standards to preserve a fantasy. And if after that someone proves they're worthy, you give, authentically. Not out of fear of losing them, but out of clarity in your identity. That's where emotional riches live. Not in chaotic attachments. Not in unresolved interactions. Not in ghost-chasing dreams. But in living a life where your confidence doesn't erode if someone disconnects. In which your self-esteem remains intact if someone walks away. You don't need external permission to feel complete, because you're whole within yourself. This is the sacred ground of Stoic relationships, where clarity governs intimacy, where respect governs presence, where boundaries govern emotional flow. And you, yes you, reimagine your relationships through that lens. You step into conversations from stability, not desperation. You commit from strength, not scarcity. You stay open, but not tapped into someone else's inconsistencies. So here's your assignment. Identify one area where you've handed power without reciprocity. Write it down. Visualize retracting that power. Then practice silence, space, or express boundary. And observe what shifts. That discomfort? That's the metamorphosis stage. That's where the emotional alchemy happens. In the end, you didn't just lose someone who didn't deserve you. You lost a pattern that cost you your self-sovereignty. And when that pattern ends, you inherit yourself again. Then you're free to love, better, more wisely, more vulnerably and more resiliently than before. That's your liberation. And it's when true emotional authority returns. When you wake up tomorrow, you'll see how your world reorients around the person you are, not around someone else's performance. And that's not just healing, that's victory. 4. Pain is a messenger, not a sentence. At first, pain feels like a judge. It pronounces you guilty of loving too much, trusting too soon, healing too slow. But what if you could shift your perspective? What if instead of treating pain like a sentence, you treated it as a messenger bringing vital intelligence? That's what separation between suffering and growth looks like. That's the difference between wallowing and waking up. When the emotional illusion collapsed, the ache in your chest wasn't just physical, it was energetic. It demanded attention. But what did you do? Many of us push it away, fill the void with food, alcohol, scrolling, meaningless connections. We bury the pain because it's uncomfortable. We label it as weakness. We call it drama. But emotional avoidance doesn't reduce the signal, it amplifies it in silence, in insomnia, in accumulation. What if instead you leaned in? Emotional intelligence begins with curiosity. What is this ache trying to tell me? What patterns triggered it? Was it longing for comfort, reflection of loneliness, hunger for validation? This is where Stoicism meets emotional mastery. Stoicism doesn't dismiss emotion, it demands ownership. Emotions are data. Pain is data. Pain is the spotlight that shows us where our values were violated. When your foundation was built on illusion, the collapse exposed your fault lines. You feel empty because your sense of identity was anchored to someone else. You feel jealous because you still believe they complete you. But Stoicism calls you to dismantle those beliefs, not shame them. Let's break this down. Pain happens when your expectations clash with reality. Your heart expected devotion, affirmation, consistency. But what manifested was silence, absence, inconsistency. That mismatch hurts. Every clinician, every philosopher, ancient and modern, knows that suffering lies in perception, not events. Stoics like Epictetus taught. We are disturbed not by events, but by the view we take of them. So feel the hurt. Name the hurt. Sit with it, like a teacher hovering over your shoulder and whispering, "Watch this. Learn this." Don't bury it. Don't ruminate without intent. Instead, journal. What am I feeling? Why am I resisting this? What do I wish I had instead? This is not weakness. It's inquiry. It's boundary. It's emotional inventory. When you extract the lessons, your grief becomes transformation. Because each lesson reveals your blueprints, what you value, where you bend, how you engage. You learn that your self-worth was too attached to external validation. You learn that your boundaries only existed on paper, not in practice. You learn that your sense of love was drawn outward before it was secure inward. Ask yourself, what boundaries were crossed, unseen, or deferred? What core needs, respect, presence, consistency, went unmet? Where did you compensate by overinvesting? That's the practical power of pain. It's a signpost marking where you must grow. Not to punish you, but to propel you forward. But that interpretation requires Stoic discipline. You must choose to see pain as fuel. Instead of, I hurt and I'm stuck. Choose, I hurt, what can this shape in me? That's growth. That's strategy. That's empowerment masked as discomfort. And here's another Stoic truth: pain is temporary, but ignorance is eternal. If you don't learn from pain, you suffer forever. But if you learn, then even your scars become weapons of wisdom. You will encounter future losses, future mismatches, but now you have navigational instruments. Pain didn't break you. It woke you. Perhaps you've heard, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The Stoics didn't use empty motivational quotes. They used methodology. They trained their minds with daily reflection, journal prompts, visualization. They tested adversity so when real adversity came, they didn't crumble. That's what you're building now: mental muscle, emotional infrastructure. When the sting arrives, you won't flee. You'll receive, you'll process, you'll distill meaning. Every time pain breaks you open, you'll write another entry in your field journal, refining your armor. You heal, not by forgetting, but by understanding. Emotional wounds fade not when ignored but when processed. This isn't fluffy healing. It's Stoic warfare against your own ignorance. You're not chasing closure. You're chasing clarity. You're not avoiding pain. You're forging with it. That's how Stoic relationships are born, not blind hope, but intentional choice. Stay with it. Explore. When did I feel most broken? What did I lose about myself in that moment? Those answers hold your next breakthroughs. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, it can feel like excavating grief with bare hands. But each stroke reveals gold. That's the difference between reactive resentment and reflective resilience. When scar tissue becomes insight, you don't just survive, you evolve. You become someone who can love responsibly, clearly, with eyes open. That's emotional invincibility. That's relationship maturity. Pain isn't optional, but wisdom is. Will you make the choice? If this resonance shifts something inside you, hit like and comment number 1 below so I know this is reaching you. And if you're committed to using these Stoic principles to rebuild your emotional freedom, hit subscribe so we can walk this journey together. 5. They didn't betray you, they just revealed themselves. Have you ever felt like someone hit a switch within you? One moment you're convinced this person is your anchor, the next you're shattered because their actions collide with your expectations. In that moment, you feel betrayed. But what if it wasn't betrayal? What if, instead, they simply dropped the act and revealed their true self? That shift doesn't signal that they changed overnight. It signals that your illusions finally cleared. They didn't betray you. You just finally saw them. When you trusted their words, the promises, the declarations of devotion, the always, and the forever, you believed in what you heard. But when their presence faded, when their attention wavered, when their promises felt rehearsed, not lived, you were faced with a choice: keep believing the fantasy, or wake up to reality. Loving is not enough to enforce consistency. And when you confuse devotion for reciprocation, you set yourself up for disillusionment. Let's be clear. Revelation is not synonymous with malicious intent. Many people act according to their capacity. They mirror the energy they receive. But you might have been giving more than you were getting, fueling a self-centered narrative. They'll show me how much I matter. And they did, through omission, inconsistency. Pause, which is also information. Your disappointment isn't a reflection of their moral character. It's a reflection of your assumptions. If you expected loyalty from someone who never prioritized loyalty, the blame game is misdirected. They didn't betray your love, they revealed your misunderstanding of who they really were. Ask yourself, when did the mask begin to wobble? Was it a missed birthday? A faded message? A promise dropped? Or simply the realization that you were praying that a projection would show up every day? That was the moment you transitioned from believing to seeing. And that sight can feel like betrayal, but it's really revelation. The core issue isn't their behavior, it's the misalignment between expectation and reality. Expecting them to change for you, your pain, your insecurity, your longing, is placing power where it doesn't belong. That's not love. That's wishful thinking. They don't exist to fill your voids. You exist to fill your voids. Stoic relationships understand this truth. No one owes you consistency. You can't demand it. You can only receive it. If it arrives, you engage. If it doesn't, you detach. You don't react, you reflect. Emotion invites reaction. Character invites response. That's emotional sovereignty. Seeing the truth gives you a gift. Clarity. Now you're released from chasing phantoms. You can stop analyzing late replies. You can stop rewriting history to salvage the narrative. You can step off the emotional treadmill. And in that space, you regain power over your feelings, your decisions, your peace. This revelation isn't a loss. It's a turning point. When you stop expecting a man to love like a hero who he never signed up to be, you stop gaining illusions and start attracting authenticity. Energy always matches reality. And if your relationship was built on projection, it'll only crumble when reality bends back. Let me give you a method. Every time you feel angry, hurt, resentful, breathe and ask, what ideal did I expect here? Maybe you expected unwavering communication. Maybe you expected admission of your pain. Maybe you expected them to invest after you did. Match their behaviors to your expectations. If there's a gap, that's your answer. So far, it's not a reckoning with them. It's a reckoning with you. Because healing begins by understanding what story you believed, not what they told you. Pause and inquire. How many times did you excuse behaviors because you couldn't admit the story was unraveling? How many times did you rationalize a red flag because it triggered fear of loneliness? Now, revelation can be jarring. But it's also freeing. Without illusions, you can choose differently. Without assumptions, your emotional compass works. Without chasing shadows, your space becomes fertile. The revelation exposes your need to be seen, but it also shows your refusal to be used. True Stoic relationships, relationships grounded in Stoicism and emotional integration, are not built on pledges of permanence. They are built by mutuality, transparency, and earned trust. They don't require sacrifice that compromises your integrity. They encourage partnership built on shared values. This reframing changes your path. You don't stay. You don't chase. You don't wait. You don't break. You don't scapegoat. You don't rewrite. Instead, you preserve your emotional energy and redirect it into your growth, your purpose, your future relationships. That's the power of revelation. It asks you to answer honestly. Did you love the person they are, or the person you wish they were? The question isn't accusatory. It's clarifying. It eliminates drama. It keeps you centered. And it builds your stewardship over your emotions, one of the pillars of Stoicism. Look at your scar. Isn't it beautiful now? It's not the result of betrayal, it's evidence that truth was needed. Not because they attacked you, but because you needed to wake up. And that awakening begins with recognizing that illusions do not equal love. Real love is based on consistency, kindness, presence, reciprocity. So now you move forward. You choose relationships rooted in earned trust, not hopeful projection. You build from reality, not fantasy. You stay calm, strong, and present when someone reveals themselves, not because you expected perfection, but because you expected honesty. You appreciate clarity over conversation. You settle for nothing less. When your relationship ends, you won't cry betrayal. You'll nod and say, "Thank you for showing me who you are." And then you'll continue your journey forward, more aware, more grounded, more free than before. Because revelation didn't just expose them, it freed you. 6. Detachment isn't cold, it's clarity. Have you ever wondered why silence feels so heavy after a breakup? That space where texts stop, replies vanish. You see life go on, but you feel frozen in time. Many mistake silence for weakness or coldness. They think not chasing or responding means they don't care. But silence isn't apathy, it's clarity. It's a declaration that you're done giving power to someone who didn't deserve it. Detachment isn't about shutting off your heart, it's about turning your attention inward, recalibrating your emotional compass, and resisting the urge to chase illusions. When you detach, not because you hate them, but because you respect yourself, you're doing something radical. You're refusing to act on impulse. You're refusing to give meaning to their absence or presence. You're saying, "I choose me." That's not cold. That's controlled. That's calm. That's calm in the middle of chaos, not because you don't feel heat, but because you've mastered your flame. Here's what detachment looks like. You wake up and don't wake up reaching for your phone. You focus on your purpose, your routines. You keep your heart open but grounded in logic. You don't replay stories in your head, wondering if she's online. You don't stalk her social media to search for a sign. You don't respond to bait. And you don't write unsent texts. That's not emotional shutdown, that's emotional intelligence. Ask yourself, why does a single think from her knock you off balance? Because you didn't detach. You're still emotionally rent-dependent. Detachment is reclaiming your strength. Detachment is neutralizing emotional fog. Detachment is creating a safe perimeter around your peace. Not for them, but for you. Now, detachment is not a punishment. It's protection. When you withhold reaction, you deny them currency. They no longer earn emotional rent from your heart. They no longer control your mood. Your day no longer hinges on her behavior. Instead, your state hinges on alignment. Your values, your clarity, your breath. That's Stoic relationships in action. Maybe you fear detachment makes you unreachable, unlovable, unemotional. That's a lie your longing tells you. Detachment doesn't reduce love. It refines it. It clarifies who deserves your energy and who doesn't. It teaches you that love, at its healthiest, isn't a broadcast, it's a respectful exchange. And when it becomes unbalanced, you step away, not because you don't feel, but because you feel too much to tolerate the imbalance. Your silence becomes your roar. In a relationship built on projection, silence breaks the illusion. Don't send a text. Don't explain. Don't chase. Because every attempt to reconcile before clarity is a chance to drown in fantasy again. Instead, let absence do the talking. Let stillness hold space for your sovereignty. Holiness. Strength. Don't spell it out, let it echo in your quiet. If you must check your phone, ask, am I seeking clarity, or craving validation? If you're scrolling her feed, ask, am I honoring my healing, or reliving the collapse? Detachment calibrates your reflex. It trains your heart to pause before responding, to value peace over presence, to see connection without losing ground. When you master detachment, when you allow yourself to sob, to process, to grieve, then choose space, you don't grieve the person. You grieve the illusion. And grief is the price of detachment. But through grief, we evolve. Detachment doesn't numb the pain, it transforms it into insight. Insight becomes growth. Growth becomes strength. Strength becomes a foundation, in you, not in them. Yes, detachment feels vulnerable. It feels lonely. It feels unnecessary when you're used to chasing. But there's liberation in absence. There's empowerment in disengagement. There's courage facing silence. And there's wisdom in deciding not to speak to anyone until your undercurrent is stable. Ask yourself again. Why does her presence or her absence still influence you? Because detachment hasn't happened yet. Every flutter of anxiety, every ping, every moment of checking, that's a trace of unresolved attachment. But every time you resist reaction, you rebuild presence. You reinforce autonomy. You assert that your emotional safety is not her responsibility, it's yours. Here's the paradox: detachment invites connection. We don't detach to isolate. We detach to align. And once aligned, you'll attract deeper connections, conversations rooted in presence, not desperation. Affection based on reciprocity, not rescue. Intimacy built on shared reality, not projection. This kind of clarity doesn't come overnight. You'll slip. You'll text. You'll open that message. That's not failure, that's feedback. That's a reminder of your humanity. Retrieve. Reset. Return to space. Learn to make peace with the absence long enough to feel your center again. That's where transformation lives. Imagine a love where your strength isn't tested by silence, but enhanced by it. Where emotional availability isn't tied to mood or match. Where respect, self and mutual, trumps presence. That's Stoic Relationships. Not cold, but clear. Not distant, but calm. Not emotionless, but intentional. So, are you exhausted by reacting? Are you ready to own your peace? Are you prepared to practice discipline in the small moments so the big moments don't shipwreck you? Then start with detachment. Not as a dramatic statement, but as a daily habit. A breath before you text. A moment of silence before you scroll. A refusal to chase shadows. The sun won't notice your silence. Her life won't pause. The world remains active, but your center will. That's the power of clarity. That's why detachment isn't cold, it's the foundation for everything real and lasting. If this part connected with you, like and comment number 1 below so I know this message lands. And if you want to continue building clarity and strength in your relationships, subscribe, so we can walk this path of Stoicism together. You've traveled this journey with me, through the collapse of fantasy, the reclamation of power, the interrogation of pain, the unraveling of masks, and the act of detachment. Now, here in this conclusion, let's weave it all together and illuminate the path ahead. We've uncovered that what you truly lost wasn't a person. They were never fully present. What you lost was an illusion, a mental photograph you cherished, a version you built in your heart, a story you told yourself that never aligned with reality. And in losing that illusion, you gained everything: clarity, autonomy, insight, and sovereignty over your emotional world. Let's begin at the top. You fell in love with a representation, a projection of safety, validation, identity. That version existed more vividly in your imagination than in life. You built a house on that projection, decorated it with hope and expectation. The moment reality beckoned, through inaction, inconsistency, absence, the house collapsed, dragging you with it. It felt like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was your own narrative collapsing. That collapse hurt because you had given your power away in the form of emotional authority. Then you interrogated your pain. You accepted that pain isn't a sentence, it's a messenger. Through pain, you uncovered your violated needs, emotional reciprocity, boundary strength, self-worth not tethered to external contingency. Pain taught you where your identity was too porous, where your self-concept relied on someone else's actions. And once you saw that, you had an opening to shift perspective, from self-pity to self-leadership, from suffering to strategy. Then came the revelation. You recognized that they hadn't become someone else. They simply revealed who they were once the illusion was gone. That unveiling freed you from hoping they'd be someone they weren't. That clarity allowed you to step out of the narrative and place your energy where it belonged, back on you. Next, you reclaimed your power from them. You recognized the emotional authority you surrendered. That surrender invited space for boundaries, recalibrated expectations, and the return of your internal sovereignty. You redefined emotional equity, engaging from disciplines rather than desires. Your power served you. You didn't serve someone else's inconsistency. When you practiced detachment, you didn't kill your flame, you controlled it. You purposefully withheld your emotional currency, leaving emotional rent uncollected by someone who didn't earn it. Instead of chasing validation, you held space for self-validation, calm, measured, grounded. Detachment brought sheen, not numbness. It was not emotional erasure, but emotional mastery. Here, in this final stretch, stand on the accumulation of those lessons. Feel your rhythm recalibrated. At the lowest low, you found radical perspective. Your heartbreak became schooling. Your solitude became proving grounds. What once felt like emptiness now feels like freedom. Ask yourself, what lies ahead? A future shaped by clarity, not craving. A presence free from projection. A state of being untethered by absence. A heart unchained by fantasy. That future is yours, anchored in authenticity, not attached to mirages. Let's close the loop with a reflection exercise. I invite you now, in private, to write 4 statements. I mourn the illusion I lost, a version painted by my desires, not theirs. I honor the lessons my pain has given me, about boundaries, love, my identity. I release the need for them to fit into a story I wrote. I choose reality over fantasy. I step forward empowered, anchored in self-awareness, fortified for future connection. Say them aloud. Feel the final weight lift as these statements ground you. This is your rebirth, no longer defined by who came and went, but by who you've become. Real love, real connection, won't demand your illusion. It will resonate with your standards. It will honor your autonomy. It will align with your emotional capital. It won't collapse because the lens is clean. It won't disappear because trust is mutual. It won't hurt because boundaries hold. That's next level Stoic relationships. And here's the homecoming. Wherever you go from here, whether you meet someone who earns your calm entanglement, or you walk this solo path of self-discovery, you will carry this. You survived your own fantasy. Your presence now isn't fragile, it's earned. Your trust now isn't free, it's informed. Your love now isn't desperate, it's discerning. And that's not coldness, that's liberation. This journey doesn't end because this article ends. It ends when your story does. So continue refining, check your perception before responding. Collect your emotional evidence. Guard your peace with quiet discipline. Speak your truth softly, but let silence reinforce it strongly. You didn't lose them, you lost an illusion. And in losing that, you gained yourself. Go forward in clarity. Build something real. Live freely. Your story has many chapters left, and the next one is written in truth, not fantasy.